list of panelists today. On the call, we have Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, please say hello. That's just my style of doing mic check. We have Dr. Ola. Mr. Collins is the CEO, I think founder and CEO of Signal Alliance, a fantastic technology company. One of my mentors in that sense. It's a pleasure to have him on the panel. Mr. Collins? We can hear you.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, fantastic. We can hear you now. We can hear you now. And we can see your face. Thank you for being here, Mr. Collins. Thank you. We have Dr. Ola. Dr. Ola, I don't know how many of us know flying doctors. Do you know flying doctors? All right, she's doing some fantastic work. Interestingly, she's also one of my investors. So, Dr. Ola, please say hello.
Everybody.
Thank you. Okay. A bit of video and audio coordination, but I think we heard you. Good morning, Dr. Ola. We have Alice from Paystack. Alice, could you say hello, please?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And I hope I got everybody that was on the call. I hope I didn't miss out any of my panelists. And I have the utmost pleasure of having in the room right here beside me Mr. Joseph from KPMG. Mr. Joseph.
Hi. How are you doing?
Thank you for being here. And of course, very specially, right to my left is my very own Oga, Mr. Tubosun, the SA to the Governor on Innovation, here as well.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
All right, fantastic. So to dive into the session, I'm going to invite Sean to give us a quick 3-minute presentation. Sean is going to introduce himself and tell us the fantastic work they're doing for the summit. And Sean?
Awesome, thank you. Should I stand? Should I sit? How do we do this?
Freestyle.
Awesome. So there's a presentation that's attached. I don't know if they'll be able to show it for everybody on the call. I'm sure they'll be able to send it later so we can go through it. But my name is Sean Burrows. I'm the co-founder of Ingressive for Good and part of the umbrella companies that include Ingressive Advisory and the $50 million VC fund, Ingressive Capital. We had an amazing conversation, an amazing webinar where we addressed within our community what were some of the issues and what were some of the obstacles and solutions to unleashing disruptive innovation. So with that being said, okay, I see they brought it up now. With that being said, there were, just to focus in, so what Ingressive for Good is going to do basically over the next 5 years is train 1 million African youth, deploy $1 million in scholarship funding, and connect our community members to 5,000 jobs. We really focus in on that 5,000 jobs perspective because from what we are seeing, there's a major bridge, there's a major gap where you cannot expect someone to go and start coming up with all of these amazing and fancy ideas if they have shorter term concerns, which include, you know, how are we going to take care of our rent? How are we going to take care of food and different things like that for the day, for the week, or for the family? So it was with that in mind that we went through a couple of different resolutions that we have presented that, again, tap into some core areas. So what we were looking at is, number one, again, if you are going to empower the community, you have to give them options and bridges. So what we have considered, or what we propose, is that there needs to be an option where the government and the private sector are incentivizing hiring African youth. If you're looking at the tech sector, what you see time and time again is there's this need for high-level talent, but there's no mechanism, there's no space for them to actually get the skill sets they need to become that high-level talent. And if you're looking at the statistics and things that we have now, basically by 2030, there's going to be a huge $8.5 trillion global amount of money missing, basically because we don't have enough tech talent. This problem that we have in Nigeria is not just a Nigerian problem, it's a global problem. We keep having people that are coming in asking us, do you have talent? Do you have coders? Do you have all these different things to plug in our systems from Eastern Europe, the United States, the UK, all these different people, they're even coming to us for talent for their spaces. There's a huge shortage. So again, there needs to be coordination between the private sector, where we're talking about corporates, we're talking about SMEs, and we're talking about entrepreneurs being able to take advantage of programs that plug people in. If you're looking at an amazing opportunity, we can leverage the NYSC program, focusing in on tech and start tracking the results. That was the first resolution that we have. I see they're not going through the slides, but I memorized it. Don't worry. The other thing that we're looking at now is also the fact that, okay, they're going through tech changes lives. These are some of the statistics. So the last thing is creating a coordinated structure, basically of communications. We do this once every other year. This needs to happen on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and on a yearly basis. There needs to be, from an operational standpoint, we all need to collectively agree on, again, like we're doing here with resolutions, but bring in more people who are active in this space and that are impacting the space, and again, have them be able to give feedback so we don't have situations like we're having now with the CBN where the whole fintech community gets blindsided. But thank you all. I could go on and on, but I appreciate the time. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Sean. And I think I'm happy to see the work you're doing, Sean, and I think that talent is the bedrock of everything we're doing. And the hope today is that we can come up with a few more resolutions with everybody on the panel, questions from the audience, and hopefully this resolution gets implemented. I didn't know a lot about the past resolutions, so I was asking Professor Olayinka David West yesterday, say, okay, when we finish all this talk, so what's going to happen? You know, and she's like, actually, there's been action going on for the past decade or so that the summit has been going on. And I'm excited to, as I walk in, I see that the link bridge, the Lekki-Ikoyi link bridge was a resolution from this summit. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to create the fourth or the fifth mainland bridge using nanobots from this resolution right now. Okay, so we're going to dive in now. So let me start with Mr. Tubosun. Now, we know that digital technologies have been instrumental in addressing developmental gaps, especially in the African region, where mobile telephony is now, I think, maybe the biggest infrastructure we have. Now, we also have SDGs, and there are 17 of them. If we were to choose one SDG to apply digital technology to, which will it be and why? If we were to choose only one. And just for everybody in the audience, we're going to have 3 minutes, about 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes for each of our speakers to give us their opinion. And then we're going to throw a few more questions to them, and then you're going to throw your questions. And then we're going to come up with the top 3 things we think are more important for development through unleashing either disruptive or progressive technology and innovation. All right? So, Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks for having me. I hope you can hear me very well through the mask. Okay. So it's an easy and a difficult question at the same time because, you can't pick and choose one area of SDG to really apply disruptive technologies. It has to be all. But if I would say one that is very existential at the moment would be education, right? Quality education. And that is especially important because we realize that the mind is the factory of innovation, right? You have all other factors that come in later, whether it's you're building prototypes, your ideas, making them prime time for investment. But I think what we need to do, where we really need to apply disruptive innovations is in edutech, education, quality education. And just to increase, you look at the visualization of education nowadays and the tools you can use to increase the absorption rates, right, of young kids. And some of the tools, the democratization of education. Right now, you can get an education online without being in a formalized setting, right? And what that does is that it unleashes, the dimensions of the mind to design, think, and come up with solutions to different problems. So I think we can really apply a lot of disruptive technology to education. And one of the programs we are even going through now in the Lagos State Science Research and Innovation Council is a program with Microsoft on HoloLens, right? We want to understand really what is the difference? How can we leapfrog a traditional-based education setting to futuristic and disruptive education techniques and measure the differences that we see. And so we're going to be executing that program in this first quarter, and to really intervene and apply these tools and techniques to really drive, because there's a lot we need to leapfrog. And so...
Is there an existing, and thank you for that, very powerful choice.
Yeah.
Very powerful choice. It's like saying I choose the cornerstone, because everything else will be built on that. Is there an existing government, Lagos State, I mean, since you're Lagos State, permit,
Go ahead.
instrument for this to happen? Is there an existing, I know, there's LASRIC, if I got that right.
Yeah.
Is LASRIC the center of our attention?
So LASRIC is one of the agencies or one of the bodies that is responsible for also driving STEM education in Lagos State. In fact, in Q4 of last year, we awarded about 10 STEM, science, technology, engineering, math companies that were building solutions to intervene in the education sector, right?
Sorry, let me cut you very quickly. I didn't want to drag it too far into LASRIC. Except you want to. But I'm saying that if we could injure one, because I'm thinking about my top 3 resolutions, and I'm already being biased and saying this is number 1 on the list. Right.
Yeah.
But is there an existing policy of the government? Is there an existing instrument?
Yeah.
That everybody can, put their resources, their time, their effort, their minds around to drive this single pillar?
So that was what I was trying to explain.
Okay,
because in driving education, right, there are multiple agencies that drive one singular goal, right, and is to raise the level of education and increase education outcomes in the state. The Ministry of Education is the pivotal agency, right, for driving education outcomes, right? And so people like us, the innovation sector, the innovation bodies, we combine efforts in trying to raise those education outcomes. Right now, there is a curriculum reevaluation and reform in Lagos State happening. It's being driven by the Ministry of Education. What bodies like LASRIC and the Ministry of Science and Technology do is to also intervene in that exercise, right? Contribute technically, right? And drive some of the things that I'm talking about now to be able to reach that outcome. So there is an exercise on curriculum reform now. Okay. So that is driven through the Ministry of Education. So if anybody wants to contribute to that exercise, it will be to contact the Ministry of Education. In fact, we actually put in a panel of experts recently to be able to drive the STEM intervention in the curriculum. So engineers, computer scientists, consultants, and a number of other experts in the field. So I would say that anybody that wants to contribute, right, to driving EdTech or education outcomes is the Ministry of Education squarely that is responsible for driving.
This panel of experts, how do they operate? What's the key contact point?
Okay, so the commissioner is one contact point, the Commissioner of Education, Mrs. Ade Fisayo. You can also talk to the SSA on STEM, Mrs. Adetola Salau, right? She's on speed dial. Okay. I can put her email address and contact.
Fantastic.
Later on before this panel session ends.
Fantastic. So we've heard it from the SA. Education will be one key thing to apply technology to. Broad spectrum, everything from basic e-learning to HoloLens to 3D animation. Just the broad spectrum of education and how technology can drive that across multiple sectors. And Mr. Tubos have also confirmed that there's a panel of experts and there's a direct contact point in working with the state to make sure that we can drive education, we can drive technology, we can drive development of education specifically using technology. Thank you, Mr. Tubos. Let me move to Mr. Joseph. So, Mr. Joseph, sometimes I can, for those that know me, they know I look for trouble from time to time. So I'm not sure if it's your trouble I'm going to start with today.
Interestingly, you look troublesome.
I look troublesome, right? Now, we just met, but I mean, like we said, Ladi and I go way back, and it's not my desire to look for your trouble this morning.
Go ahead.
But you are the one that have the most troublesome question on the list, so I'm going to ask you anyways. Now, we want to drive development. We want to use disruptive, and I like to say progressive technology to drive development. We want to unleash the power of technology. See what unleashing cryptocurrency or cryptography has done to the quagmire, or is it the dilemma, or is it the conundrum of currency around the world, right? Now, KPMG and yourself and the government and the Big Four, you play an important role in this ecosystem, an important role to steer things, an important role to ensure that the storms are kept in check, an important role to ensure that investment is attracted, an important role to ensure that the rails for which things will run, for which development will be driven, is laid. What would you say on the government side needs to happen from a policy standpoint, from a regulation standpoint? How do we unleash this innovation in a sustainable way? How do we do this? How do we prevent all the start and stop, all the 4 steps forward, 40 steps backward kind of scenario? Please.
Thank you very much, Salami. I think you haven't looked for trouble. I think you've asked a very important question. For me, I think the essay was already touching on one of the key things that I was going to talk about in reaction to this. And that is issue about embedding digital technology into our educational curriculum. Today, I believe that we need to review educational curriculum, which is what he's saying that they've started to do. We need to include digital and technology skills in our curriculum. There was a couple of years ago, I don't know whether it was 2016 or thereabout, there was something called Code Lagos,
yes.
Which was an initiative that was launched by Lagos State government. And I think we should take a second look at that, you understand? It needs to be revamped. I think you can use that to deliver critical mass of digital technology skills that we require. If you look at Ghana, for instance, Ghana also has Ghana Code Club. And what they do with the Ghana Code Club is a national after-school program that Ghana has initiated, developed by a non-profit organization in collaboration with government to ensure that people pick up technology skills. I think as we do this, the second major policy step and intervention, I would say, is stimulating youth entrepreneurship in digital space. I like your presentation. And basically, we can't fold our hands and just you need to create that right enabling environment for the youth. In partnership with private sector and other government agencies, I think we need to establish programs to provide that capacity building and financial assistance to youth-led startups, which is basically most of the problems. Some have been lucky to access international funds, but not everybody has been. So it's one of the things that is, stifling growth in that sector. And I use the Cambodia example. They call it Techo Startup Center. And in the Techo Startup Center, which is an accelerator in Cambodia, is facilitated by government. And what they do basically is to support the young entrepreneur technology startups owned by youth in the country, offering them mentorship, linking them to big companies, big CEOs, providing funding, skills, and development program. So that's my second intervention or recommendation from policy. The third one, which is very important, and I listened to the morning section where Funke Okweke and Segun Ogunsan were talking, and I believe that, you see, the fiscal tax incentives and waivers are important for technology innovators. At the end of the day, R&D tax incentives for technology innovation, we have not fully implemented it in this country. It's something we need to look at, especially for young startups who are leveraging creative technology, and who are unleashing innovation. Tax waivers, even for local technology manufacturers, are extremely, extremely important. One of the things I know that Salami you have in mind, it's also government consistency. We can put waiver in place, we can put incentive in place, but if you implement that waiver or incentives in the first 2 years and third year, there's a reversal of policy. And 3 steps forward, 6 steps backward. I know that in the side discussion we're having, you are referring to GoCada. I'm not privy to details of what happened, you understand? But the truth at the end of the day is that there's nothing that is very detrimental to growth than policy inconsistency. There should be clarity in policy. Once there's clarity in policy, then you can actually hold all parties to their responsibilities. The last recommendation which I will give is driving policies to promote use of locally developed technology solutions. It's extremely important. You can create supply, but if you don't create demand, then you're going to have challenges. The beauty of it today is that because of our population and various other things, the demand is there. You understand? But that demand needs to grow. You understand? And for me, I think we need to enforce provisions of NIDA local content guidelines to ensure, look, most organizations today, even government organizations, ERP systems we use SAP developed in Germany by Germans. We use Oracle, we use IBS, we use Microsoft Dynamics, all sorts of things. But I can tell you, there are local software developers here who have developed ERP systems, who have developed reconciliation systems, who have developed ATM reconciliation systems, who have developed all sorts of very innovative systems. We need to encourage those operators in Nigeria. It's extremely important, and as we do it, and we embark on e-governance, which is the digitization of government services, we can then have uptake, because then we can create the demand side for some of these things. I think those are the 4. I know you're checking your time, so I don't overrun on time. Fantastic. Those are the 4 policy interventions and incentives I believe are pivotal, will be very pivotal to unleashing innovation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph. Someone is taking notes for me, so I'm going to be able to run through, because you give 4 very powerful points. Definitely, I love the tax incentives. I have tens of millions of naira in withholding tax in my name that I wish the government can just return to me. Ladia Century. All right, Mr. Joseph, no problem. But fantastic point. Thank you very much. Let me go online now. Alice. And apologies to our audience. We started 15 minutes late, so but we want to make sure we have a very rich session, so we're trying to get everybody. Alice, did I get that right? That's Alice, right?
Yes, that's right.
Hello, Alice? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. All
right, awesome. So I'm going to come to you now, and we all know the thank you guys for giving us a fantastic news. The Paystack team, and Alice is from Paystack. Alice, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do at Paystack, and then I'm going to jump straight into the question, which is, of course, we want to grow the Lagos ecosystem. We want to nurture the tech environment in Lagos, especially. This is a Lagos summit. But Lagos, for me, is not just Lagos. Lagos is like London. London is like Dubai. Even though they are states, they are like countries to themselves in that sense. They are a powerful institution. So Lagos for me is like saying Lagos for Africa or Lagos for the world, as opposed to just Lagos by itself or Lagos for just Lagos for Nigeria. Now the question is, how do we nurture the innovative ecosystem or the innovation ecosystem in Lagos? What are the key ingredients you think will be required in unleashing technology for development in Lagos?
I was passively listening to the morning session, And just hearing what the essay has mentioned and the gentleman from KPMG, I think a lot of points have been made around an enabling business environment. I think that topic has probably been beaten like a dead horse. Taxation, policy and consistency, driving education, so many points. So I think three key things from my end. I think the first thing really is evangelism, right? And what I mean by that is, the evangelism of software companies, right? So if you have events like Web Summit in Lisbon, you have events like the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, which have essentially rebranded those respective host cities, right? Or in Eastern Europe, I know some examples were given of the Southeast Asia, but if you look at Eastern Europe and the companies that have come out of there, TransferWise, UiPath, so many companies. One example, for example, is Estonia. If you see, for example, how the government has essentially taken it upon itself to rebrand the country as e-Estonia, right? From the minute you land at the airport, everything is digital, right? I think there was a point made earlier this morning around the government itself is not digital, right? So really the point around evangelism is if you can transform Lagos, and create the idea that a startup is a normal thing, like in San Francisco, for example, you don't need to tell any teenager there that they can create, right? But if I come, for example, to Lagos, you do need, because it's not our reality, right? So having these types of events, for example, like this, which is much broader, it's the Lagos Economic Summit. I'm looking forward to the governor hosting a Lagos Tech Summit, right? It's saying to your community that this is okay, this is valuable. It makes it feel possible. There's value to working at software companies, and it changes social attitudes, it changes culture. It teaches people that startups are good for the community, right? So an example I like to give is when I joined Paystack last year, for every person that encouraged me to join Paystack, there were probably over a dozen that were dissenters, right? So we grew up in this culture where, which is fine, go work for a big company, get your pension, move up the corporate ladder, right? So I think there's an awareness that needs to be created around building, around creating, and working in a startup, right? That needs to change. So it's more around like a cultural movement away from how, say, like I mentioned, how I grew up. So I think that's one point that I haven't quite heard in all the conversations. There are like two other things that I can mention, but I think that would be repetitive. But I think there's something to be said around just evangelism in general. So yeah, that's
Thank you
what I
very
have
much,
to say on
Alice.
that.
I think the point I take from what you're saying is that we need to make technology a first culture, more like a first, make as clear as it is for a child to know what a car is. A 5-year-old, my daughter is 4. I'm hoping that by the time she's 5, maybe, thanks to some of the STEM work you're doing, CCO also has the STEM cafe. What Alice is saying is that she should actually know that she can create what she wanted to create. And I know the power in what she's saying because I would have studied for 14 years to learn how to manufacture medical equipment. Of course, that was the only way my secondary school brain could think. So I thought I needed to study medicine, then do computer science, then do elect, and start manufacturing medical equipment. Thank God for a certain man called Abiodun Ajijola, who did a program called Youth Entrepreneurship Program. And in 4 weeks, I learned that I didn't need to do 14 years. All I needed to do was understand how technology works, understand how creating a team happens, understand how to write a business plan, even if it's 3 pages, how to do a financial model, how to talk about your market, and how to create that technology you want to create without ever needing to be a medical doctor myself or an engineer myself. Of course, I can be, but I'm just a member of the team. And that's the co-founding environment. So more evangelism around just general awareness of how technology works and how, it's not so huge. A lot of people, I know so many people that really think that technology is a mystery. And I understand that, because even the Yaba culture is almost like a cult. You know, it's almost like a cult. Like, people are not sure, okay, how do I even work for Paystack, or how do I work for Google, or how do I work for Ribi, or anything like that. So that, communication, the making it very clear and easy for people to understand what is technology, how do you participate in building technology or using technology or implementing technology, becomes extremely important. 80% of the customers of people that need financial services in Nigeria, because I work in the financial services space, cannot, it's not that they don't want to, cannot interact with the technology solutions to drive it, for several reasons that we don't want to go into here. Digital inclusion, beyond even the accessibility to even be able to pay for the services. USSD is not that simple, education barrier and so on and so forth. But does the evangelism as to what is required to be able to solve this problem, to use technology to deliver innovation, is extremely critical point. Sorry, I'm not one of the speakers or the panelists today, so I'm going to reduce my commentary as much as possible. But that one got to me. I'm going to move on to Dr. Ola now. Yes, sir.
Talked about branding. That branding is extremely important. She talked about e-Estonia. You see, for a long time, when Lagos and till today, Lagos is synonymous with smart city concept. And even when you go outside Nigeria and people are discussing smart city, the impression is that we're high there when it comes to smart city attribute to deployment. I think making this government also has to be an e-government. It should be branded and should continue to follow the policies and guidelines that brands us as a technology state. So I think I just don't want us to lose that branding element.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, for that. You wanted to comment on something?
Yeah. Perhaps I should let Dr. Ola speak.
Okay.
So I'll just respond
on the back
in
of
kind to
a
lot of the issues raised. Yeah.
Fantastic. I want to jump into the interaction session in the next few minutes. So I'm going to ask the question for Dr. Ola and the question for Mr. Collins together. And then we'll jump straight into some additional questions and start taking questions from the audience. This is just to lay the foundation of the conversation. And then we'll go through our resolutions in the last 10 minutes. I see we have 48 minutes more, so a bit of time on our side. Dr. Ola is someone I've come to respect a lot. Fantastic woman. And she's done fantastic work with our companies, Flying Doctors and Green Tree, invested in a number of businesses, mine inclusive. So I'm sure she has some fantastic points to share on things around. Dr. Ola, what skills and capabilities do we need? And how do we backward integrate into our tertiary and vocational institutions? And I'm sure you've broken this down. To break it down a little bit for the audience is what, I like the definition of strategy that says that target audience for value proposition and the capabilities to deliver that value proposition to that target audience is that strategy. So if we want to do all these fantastic things, if we don't have the capabilities, we don't have the skills to deliver it, tertiary institutions, our vocational institutions are not building the competence to deliver this, we're not going to go anywhere. So Dr. Ola, just before you answer, but that's what I'd love for you to talk us through. And Mr. Collins, what types of digital solutions should we, would contribute to the kind of development we want to see? How do we unleash these solutions? To get to where we want to get to. Dr. Ola, please.
Hi, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's so interesting that we're talking about backward integration and trying to prepare our universities and vocational institutions to sort of be better aligned with the world of work. So I'm sort of going to start by actually turning the question on its head, that do we really need these vocational institutions and tertiary institutions as much as we think that we need them in the first place? If you look at what PwC and KPMG have been doing in the UK, it's fascinating because they did an experiment about 5 years ago where they started admitting secondary school leavers into Big Four audit firms. And it turns out that while we've been slaving away for like the 5 years or 6 years in our different courses, they had been working and gaining industry experience at these Big Four firms. And when they compare the performance of the people that went to university and the people that stayed in Big Four firms working as from their secondary school exit program, there wasn't very much difference in performance. So it started to make me think around the fact that perhaps, maybe we put too much emphasis on tertiary institutions in the first place, and maybe there should be some professions and some programs that allow secondary school exit routes. But what skills would you really need to be able to take up an opportunity for a secondary school exit route? I think there's some things that are not hard skills, but things that are needed for this fourth industrial revolution workplace that perhaps aren't taught very well in Nigeria that we need to concentrate on. Things like critical thinking, things like logic, logical thinking. I think that we're very, very, very good in Nigeria at supernatural and spiritual thinking, but not so good at logic, following a logical trail of thought to a conclusion. So critical thinking, reading and writing, analytical skills are things that I think that we also need to concentrate on. And I think we've spoken a lot about edutech and sort of learning online. But, there are other ways of distance learning. And I think that, you should be able to take a degree whilst working. I think you should be able to take a BSc whilst working. And one of the most interesting things that I've done recently is I took my master's in finance and economics. And I took it not even online. They were sending the materials to me via post. We were working, so I took my degree completely distance without a computer. And I think that that's very important for sort of revolutionizing education in Nigeria, because a lot of people just can't leave the market. They can't leave what they're doing. They need to be able to do something in the evenings while earning an income during the day. I think a lot of people are just too poor to be able to take those 4 years for tertiary education. And if there were more options where people could learn in the evenings without having to go online and use a lot of data, then that might be, that might be a way forward. I also think entrepreneurship and teaching entrepreneurship formally is important. I also think that we need more industry participation. So most of the courses that I took in finance were not by academics. They were actually by people in industry, investors, venture capitalists, private equity practitioners. So I felt like I got a really, really practical education as well. And I think that we should start including more people from industry in our education system. And then I think, how do we fund this all is the problem, because it's all well and good saying, how do we backward integrate and what are the skills needed? But, where does the money actually come from to do all this stuff? Now, Cuba and Venezuela are super interesting countries, because last year they made $20 billion from doctors, exporting their doctors. They just take a fee from the salary that their doctors earn abroad. Cuba made nearly $20 billion from this trade. Their biggest export is actually their doctors. Our biggest export is probably our doctors as well in Nigeria. It's just that we don't monetize them. They just kind of leave in a really haphazard way, and there's no way of monetizing those skills. So I think that we should pay for the skills that we need to skill up the people that we need to skill up, the 20 million probably unemployed people that we have in Nigeria, by looking at how we can monetize the skills that already exist. And just to put that in context, we only made about 7 or 8 billion from oil and gas last year. So really, this is like a huge potential export that is a lot more sustainable than the extractive industries that we rely on, and sort of is something that is going to grow. Whereas, as we know, probably oil and gas in the next 10 to 15 years isn't going to be as relevant a source of income as it is now. So my main points are around the skills, are around more flexible transitions to work. So secondary school exits, for instance, more closer relationships with industry, more flexible learning options, and also, being able to fund all of those initiatives. Perhaps by finding a way of monetizing the skilled people that we already have. And then I think we should also look at using our diplomatic outposts in a more Lagos State especially, communicating with our diplomatic outposts in America, in Europe, in Australia, wherever the developed countries are, in a more sustainable way than we do, to actually look at the skills that are needed in those countries, so and try to train for those skills, so that we even have an off-taker in those developing countries, those developed countries, that people can work from campuses in Nigeria and earn from them through some sort of government program. Because I feel like, the diplomats that I've met from America and Canada here, they actually have financial targets that they're supposed to reach. At the beginning of their posting, they say this is the money that you're supposed to bring into the country. It's not, it's very, very structured. And I think that if we could use those diplomatic outposts because of the cheaper labor here, more efficiently, then we could actually not just develop skills and people travel abroad, but actually have some kind of off-takers in those developed countries to say, okay, these are the skills that we need. These people can work remotely. We can work through this diplomatic route to be able to monetize these skills without you guys having to leave the country. And that provides income for the government, number one, but it also provides income for people that are currently unemployed and are in need of skills. So I've tried to talk about the ideas, but also make them sustainable as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Ola. I'm going to take Mr. Collins very quickly. In case you just joined us, this is the Unleashing Disruptive Innovation for Development in the Lagos Economic Summit. Key resolutions already: education is number one SDG. If we have to focus on one thing, tax incentives, education support program, policy consistency, local content, evangelism of the tech ecosystem, very critical. And Dr. Ola's point, on-the-job learning, that's so powerful. I got my first admission to study MBA in 2009, some school in London, but I didn't go because I just entered job market. Let me earn some more money. And my dad was like, I don't try. You have to pay for this one yourself, right? So if there was such an on-the-job learning opportunity, I probably would have taken it. I then finally did it in Unilag in finance in 2016. So very important to say, keep people at their jobs, train them there, empower them there, as opposed to sending them off for 4 years. That's for something that they can't afford. And that is very powerful. Thank you, Dr. Ola. Export our people and talent. If you don't know, you know. Plug in there. I know people that are gaming strongly for this. And we have the people, we have the raw material. Let's use it. And lastly, diplomatic outposts for tech. Very, very powerful point. Thank you very much, Dr. Ola. Mr. Collins, floor is yours, sir. We want to dive into the meat of the matter now as we wrap up in the next 20 minutes. What technologies, we have been talking technology, disruptive technologies, what is this disruptive technology, Mr. Collins? You are the tech expert. Break it down for us. Tell us 2 or 3 of the technology areas we should focus on in terms of overall tech ideas. Some of us are, primary school level understanding in terms of tech, so please break it down. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. The good thing about being the last speaker is that I can say that everybody has said what I wanted to say, so there's really nothing more to say. I'm going to try and step a bit back from what you've asked and to look at innovation itself. So if you want to talk about innovation, we need to ask ourselves, what is the definition of innovation in the context of Lagos? The earlier session talked about fourth industrial revolution. So Lagos is a city of 20 million people. Any innovation you are doing today is in the context of the service you provide to those 20 million people and then any other market you want to go to. And you can drive this 2 ways. It can be driven by industry, in which case, what mostly happens now, a particular part of the industry sees an opportunity based on the market it sees within Lagos and then attacks that, and then they push up that sector, like as is happening in fintech today, for instance. Or Lagos can decide to have a deliberate plan to be an innovative city. And in doing that, then at the center of that is the average citizen. So if you look at the average citizen in Lagos today, how do you innovate to improve his life? Okay? So if I'm an average person in Lagos, what are the key problems I have that I would like government to move from point 1 to point 2? Again, going back to fourth industrial revolution, so if I look at the average person today, which industrial revolution is he living in? Is it the fourth industrial revolution or the first? Now, if he's living in the first or the second, How do we innovate to moving from their first to second and from second to third before we even talk about the fourth industrial revolution? And I'll give you a few examples. So a Lagosian today spends average of 3 hours in traffic. Let's assume if we measure it in 3 hours. And we'll ask ourselves, how can we innovate to improve his life so that he spends, instead of 3 hours, he spends 2 hours or he spends 1 hour in the next 5 years? If you do that alone and government can measure itself every year, we measure 3 hours, 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour over the next 5 years. The innovation it will unleash on a lot of things. It's not a particular technology to be for. And as an example, it will need Lagos State to go to Dangote and say, how can we build better roads and deliver better roads in a day or two instead of a month or two? How do we make sure that we don't close third mainland for 4 weeks or 4 months for a repair that if you use innovation, you can do it in 48 hours? That is my definition of innovation for the average person. So using that model, I've looked at a few areas where we think that by using smart policy, measurable policy, we can unleash innovation in Lagos. So we look at health. Let's look at health as an example. What is it that an average Lagosian wants in health? I want to have a HMO scheme. How many people do we have right now? We have maybe 1 million people out of 20 million people. How can we move from 1 million to 15 million in the next 5 years? And if you have 15 million Lagosians using HMO, if you want to do vaccination, it is easier. If you want to do e-health, it is easier. I think that you can take this around everything. In my own, I actually did a study around connectivity. If you want to look at connectivity, if you want to look at physical mobility, if you want to look at security, I think it is creating what you want to have for the average citizen and then putting it in a measurable policy and make sure that you measure it. Because we can talk about how to use blockchain. Look, I want to talk about this blockchain, HoloLens. All those things are very fancy and nice. But what does that mean to the average Jew in Lagos? It means absolutely nothing. Unless a Lagosian consumes something and you have 50% of the population consuming it, or 80% of the population consuming it, you cannot innovate on it. I don't think you can innovate on it. So I think we should go back a bit. My takeout in this should be, let us measure which industrial revolution is the average Joe in Lagos. And then how can we use policies, smart policies, to drive that person from first industrial revolution to second industrial revolution. If you do that, you unleash the greatest innovation you can ever see in Lagos. And it has to be in a measurable way. I think that's just the way I want to look at it. So I don't want to talk about technology, fancy technology that we can use. We do bring the fancy technology, and then 10,000 people out of 20 million are using it, and you think it's innovation. It's not innovation.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Spoken like I know you to speak. The truth as you see it. Thank you very much, sir. So there are a few more questions here to go through, but I wanted to open it up to the audience a bit. If anybody has any questions, I would take 2 questions, maybe 3. But feel free to signify. Do I have my mic? Yes, and then also on the Zoom, we'll take a few questions, see how many we can take. Once my clock hits 20, which is in 13 minutes, I'm going to start summarizing on the resolutions. Mr. Bosu, that sounds good? Mr. Joseph? Yeah. Sounds good? Yeah. Okay, so barring when I see any hands up or I hear that there's a question on Zoom. Okay, is there any question on Zoom? No question on Zoom yet. Okay, please drop your questions on Zoom. We won't be able to take audio on Zoom, just managing of space.
I think perhaps maybe I should respond.
Yes, please. Yes. Yeah. Just hold on, sir. Just 1 minute, sir. Your name, sir?
My name, excuse me. My name is Toba Otusoya.
Toba Otusoya. I'll take your question in just after him. Go on, sir.
So just to respond to, say, a number of suggestions and concerns that came up earlier, and I think so that we can have a more balanced outlook at the current situations. So in terms of, I think Alice mentioned evangelism, right? And perhaps proliferating the need for technology across different ecosystems. I think Lagos State has really started to turbocharge this particular initiative. And it's evident with our AOT summit, our tech summit. Yes, the Art of Technology, right? That has been branded the Lagos State Tech Summit. And in fact, I think Shola Akinlade of Paystack was actually invited twice, but it probably conflicted with his schedule. And, you know, out of the first Art of Technology event, we had several design thinking sessions, right? The design thinking sessions, the objective of it was to design think with the ecosystem, right? Sit down with the innovators, the problem solvers, the software developers, the funders, and design think our way out of a lot of the issues that we had. And out of that was born the Innovation and Technology Master Plan, the first for Lagos. And that was in 2019, December of 2019. That was the outcome from that. And in December of 2020, when we had AOT 2.0, it was really to showcase some of the outcomes, right, from that Innovation and Technology Master Plan. What were some of the initiatives that we picked up, have started executing? What have been some of the outcomes? What is the status of some of these projects? And we actually displayed a number of initiatives that came out of AOT 2.1, AOT 1.0. The master plan was based on 4 major pillars: infrastructure, talent, funding, and access. Access, when you talk about data access, right? And having the data sets available for innovators to be able to innovate and solve problems. Out of that was born the Open Lagos project, right? Otherwise known as ECO 360. And we displayed all of that, where Lagos State is digitizing millions of data sets, right? From all the way from land records from the 1890s, right? And you know, this is supposed to enable innovation and development in various facets, right? And we also displayed the open source project that was really supposed to give an enabling environment for software developers to create the kind of solutions that will solve civic challenges, right, across the ecosystems. The open source initiative was not just a program to solve issues, but it was also a talent management, or is also a talent management program. Because in software development, you are what you work on, right? And if you do not have the kinds of complex problems to solve, you really do not develop your skill sets, right? And we thought to ourselves, government has huge challenges, right? We have the collective intelligence of our innovative ecosystem out there. Why not bring them together, right? Let these people solve the problem. So we are getting the solutions. They are getting better at what they do, you know? And with that, we saw that, you know, we could create a really massive talent pool. Because if you look at the likes of, you know, DARPA in the US, government has complex challenges, right, that people work on. They work on these problems, they become real better at what they do, and they increase their talent level. So, you know, it's killing 2 birds with 1 stone with that program. So a number of other things came out of the AOT. So there's been quite a bit of deep evangelism, and it's continued. Even the managing director of Y Combinator spoke at AOT 2.0, and just recognizing that a lot of our startups go through Y Combinator. You know, I've not spoken about the Lagos State Science Research and Innovation Council and a number of other programs, right, that they're executing and their program for this year. In terms of policy consistency, I have to say this, that there has to be a link between private industry and the legislature. It's extremely important, right? And we are helping to drive that. Later this month, we're going to have a policy roundtable with the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee in the House, right? To open up the link between industry and the legislature. If you look at the US, a lot of companies, a lot of industries and ecosystems lobby the United States Congress, right, for favorable laws that would open up opportunities, right? And we think it's very important that industry also begin to participate, to engage the legislature, right? And to help them understand where the areas to unlock value, really are. So it's very important for those kind of events to happen, and we are helping to lead that discussion. So there are so many others. I'm sure in the Q&A session, I'll have the opportunity to answer some more questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'll revise my time backwards by another 10 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Tubosun. If you were to give, is it going to be the essay on education, or you're giving us someone on tech as well?
Yes, so
more science and tech.
I thank God that the Honorable Commissioner for Education is here. So a lot of people work with her, the SSA on STEM. She would also be, I'll be dropping her contact. She has given me permission to drop her contact. So okay. I'll be dropping her contact. So people can contribute
including our house address. I'm just kidding.
I hope not.
I'm just joking.
You know, people can contribute to the STEM conversations going on. And of course, engage last week as well, the Research and Innovation Council on some of the STEM call-outs it will be having and some of the STEM interventions it will be having. So
yeah. Okay, so because what I would like to see come out of this is a single point of contact, and well done, welcome, a single point of contact to, if you want to do anything with Lagos State. Again, we're here for development. We're here for Lagos State, right? So that's why there seems to be a lot of, Lagos State smooshing in the process. But if Lagos State is doing us favor, then we'll return it. Otherwise, maybe not. So now, your question, sir.
Well, excuse me. My question, I've listened to the panelists, their commentary with regards to how we can unleash innovation within Lagos. What I'm hearing from everybody that has spoken is that it would appear that, even going back from just riding on what the essay has just mentioned, it would appear that Lagos State government on its part is actually doing a lot.
Started.
Yes, has started. Okay, let's use your own words. Has started engaging the ecosystem. Even from the plenary this morning, some of the speakers, it would appear that a lot of people in the ecosystem are still disconnected with government, with what government is trying to do. So that suggests to me that there's still a little bit of disconnect between what government is trying to do and what is perceived by the ecosystem in terms of the role that government is playing. So my question really goes to the special advisor. How do we build trust, or how do we continue to build trust in such a way that the ecosystem are more receptive to what government is doing, and they are keen and eager to actually engage with us? Now, right up to that question, you mentioned the need to actually engage the legislative arm of government, because some of these things may need to actually be turned into law. Part of that, building that trust, in that process of trying to engage the legislative arm of government, it's very, very important that the ecosystem is actually carried along, so that as government officials, we are not just making decisions and making policies that we feel that the ecosystem require, without actually taking an input from that ecosystem.
I'll take all the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. So I'm going to take the two more questions. There are no more questions on Zoom, so I'm going to take the two questions, final two questions together. But please, you need to stand up and come forward. Please. Thank you. You raised up your hand? Yes, just stand as well. So I was hoping I would get a question from the other side.
Sorry, just to make a comment, and a very brief one.
Yes, sir.
Ehigbeti is about Lagos and not about Lagos State government. What that means is that what the past Ehigbetis have delivered, it has forced or encouraged the Lagos State government to take certain actions, but it has also encouraged the private sector to take actions, and it has created an ecosystem also for them to partner to then take joint actions. So I think the idea is that it's not only about what Lagos State government should do, and of course there's a lot that they should do, but it's also about what the private sector should do in terms of actions, and the space for collaboration between Lagos State government and the private sector. Just to make that comment, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, sir. Before you go, sir, your name, sir?
My name is Samuel Egube.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Commissioner. Appreciate that. Final question?
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So my name is Ahmed Bola Tijani, the Secretary in Nigeria Computer Society, Lagos State Chapter. So mine is like a contribution that might eventually be a question too. So the essay talked about in bringing up disruption in the ecosystem, edutech, and I also go with that. Very, very important. Disruption actually had to do with.
I'm so sorry, because of time, I want to jump straight to the questions.
So not question though, just like contribution. And I'd like to have a contribution in three different categories.
60 seconds, sorry.
Okay. So I think in tackling the issue of edutech, we should rather think about having vocational study centers for training on ICT instead of looking at the curriculum for schools. You know, having the vocational center will be focused on IT, and in a short while, we'll get results, good results. And again, at the level of Nigeria Computer Society, Lagos State Chapter, we have actually approached Lagos State government on the idea of having an agency that would actually sit and have all these ideas come together. One that would also, after a while, grow up. You know, take for instance, this gentleman here talked about Code Lagos. After a while, Code Lagos is gone. We are saying if there's an agency wherein Code Lagos is actually brought up.
Code Lagos is resident in LSCTF, Lagos State Employment Trust Fund.
Okay, but now what we are saying is this: there are so many ideas as well that have come and gone. We are thinking an agency like this should be the one to abort this innovation and find a way to grow to grow the innovation actually. And the last idea again is this: we have a message to the government telling them that the state government innovation should have structures that will accommodate the government at the local level. We believe, because we are in partnership with the Lagos State government, they are really doing quite a whole lot. Well, we think that these innovations or the ideas of the state government should go beyond the state, should go through the state to the local government, and even if possible to the LCDs, to the community development associations of local governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I had a few questions here that I would love to discuss, and I can just browse through them very quickly. But I have 19 minutes, and I want us to use the last 10 minutes to summarize the point from here. Honorable Commissioner, before you came in, there have actually been very extensive contributions that span private sector, public sector, Lagos State, diplomatic outposts outside of Lagos State, and so on and so forth, in the entire process. Sorry, my mic, right? Yeah. So, for example, education as a key, if we're going to take only one SDG that we needed to apply technology to, only one. We didn't have a choice of 2 or 3. The question said 1, and I love that point. It was a tough choice, but we chose education. Education should be the sector that the number 1 in applying all of what we're thinking around technology to. The second is around things like education support programs, tax incentives, policy consistency, contact consistency. Let's just call it consistency. Everything consistency, right? Everything consistent, right? That is very critical in terms of how we're using technology to drive development. There needs to be one continuous point of contact. Even if you wish, use the strategy that the technology firms that we're trying to emulate use. Uche. Some people even think that Uche owns Taxify. You just get an email from Uche. This Uche from Taxify again. Maybe Uche even left Taxify as a company, and then they just give somebody else's name. From today on, your name is Uche. Because what? Everybody knows Uche from Taxify. So who is the Uche from Lagos, for example, that this, the community can engage with, and they know it might be a system, but there needs to be that consistency. Even things around laws, today is 200 cc's. I won't say what. I won't mention if it is Go or it is Com or it is Max or it is Mini. But today is 200 cc, tomorrow is 500 cc. There needs to be those consistencies. We've talked about evangelism for tech. I was saved by evangelism for 14 years. You were not here when I gave the example. I would have studied for 14 years. 14 years. This is my small life. 2003. But I studied for 4 weeks and I learned the same thing. Evangelism solved that problem, knowing what to do, how to do it. You know, and Commissioner for Education, pleased to meet you, ma'am. I hope I'm getting that right. Because a friend of mine has been telling me how you've been trying to infuse technology education at the primary school level and secondary, and know a lot of companies that build fantastic technology solutions for everything from K1 to 12 to, you know, university and so on and so forth. We've talked about on-the-job learning, you know, instead of having to push people to all the universities and so on and so forth. Why not put them through a learning program where they're in companies? Dr. Ola gave an example of PwC and KPMG doing an experiment in London and not having to wait to employ people right out of secondary school. Maybe they can't pay for university education, so let them be doing their online degree while they're working for Ribi or Paystack or Gokada or Max or whatever it is. He's driving his Okada in the night or weekend. He's doing his studies. I have my office assistant is studying in Yabatech, right? And I know he's already doing some office work. By the time the guy graduates, he's probably a manager compared to his colleagues that were just only studying. You know, so a lot of things we've talked about. Exporting our talent. We have it, so let's use it, right? We've talked about that. And several examples as to how some countries are exporting their doctors, training and exporting their doctors as a way to generate revenue for the country, as well as build capacity in their own institutions. Diplomatic outposts for tech. And then in the last point, we're saying, so what are the tech solutions that we should build, really? And I like Mr. Collins' point there to say, it's not actually about the tech solution that we should build. It's more about what are the problems that need to be solved. What are the development areas that need to be addressed? So we asked the question backward. Two of those questions were turned backwards. One was the education system. We said, forget about the education system, think about the problem and focus on using that. Forget about the technology, think about the solution that is required, the problem that needs to be solved, and then focus the technology on those solutions. So those are our resolutions, and I want us to take them one by one. I'll take a vote, and then we'll drill down into those things, and then we'll close on our submissions. If there are no further questions, we have 14 minutes to go. Now, it seems we all agree that education is number one. If you're in disagreement, raise up your hand. If you're in agreement, please raise up your hand. Okay, I think we have a quorum, including my awesome panelists on the call. So we all agree that education is number one on the list. So let's dive into that a bit. What are the top 2 or 3 things? And I don't know I know Sholakwe. I don't know who is in charge of Engbeti from a Lagos State. Sir?
Sorry?
I don't know who's in charge of the summit on a year-to-year, like maybe an agency. Okay. What I would love is for this session, the technology session of this, and hopefully some other sessions, next year to not be about talking. Let's not talk. Let's take these resolutions and spend half of that time reporting on the things that have been done and then taking additional feedback. If that's okay, sir. Thank you very much. Fantastic. So next year, we're not going to come and talk about the ideas and possible solutions. We're going to be asking the question, so where are the diplomatic outposts that Lagos is driving relationships with? How many tech companies have Lagos State worked with to establish their, operations in Nairobi, in, Kigali, in London, in Australia, in Sydney, in Tokyo? Because we have diplomatic outposts everywhere. What has diplomatic outposts done in the last 1 year to use technology to drive development, both from Lagos, thinking of Lagos not only as a recipient, but also an exporter of this talent, right? So education, who wants to go? Mr. Joseph? Anybody in the audience? Alice? Dr. Ola? Mr. Collins? Hands raised. Okay, fantastic. I'll go with Dr. Ola first. Dr. Ola, please. The floor is yours. Education. Our first resolution. Mic check. I'm going to do some Ojoro this afternoon. I love that diplomatic outpost.
Can you hear me?
So I'm going to slide it in. Please, yes. Please go ahead.
So I did vote for educational. You told me to talk about skills, but my vote is always with healthcare. You know that. But if I have to talk about education, then I think that really Lagos State and the private sector working together to really make sure that we, like the last point you made, picking up on the last point you made, really make sure that we communicate with like the top 5 diplomatic outposts that we have in developed countries to say what skills do we need, or what skills does your country need, and how can people in Nigeria, without having to travel, work with the private sector in your country to export those skills. I think that our biggest, available export, with the price of oil fluctuating, Tesla and the electric cars, the electric car movement becoming sort of a lot more prominent, I think our biggest export will always be our skills for the foreseeable future. And just working more coherently with some of these large economies and saying, what are the skills that you need that people in Akure can learn, and you guys will offtake us, pay through a platform or pay directly to the recipients, kind of like a larger sort of umbrella structure where it could be financial modeling, it could be design, it could be, I don't know what these countries want, it could be call center services, but really being a bit more aggressive with them and seeing what the needs are and how we can monetize those skills that can be learned in a short space of time.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Ola. If you can put your hands down, can I get the mic? Can I get my screen again to see if there are any hands up? Alice? My controller. Yes.
Yeah,
Alice,
yeah.
yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to very briefly. I'm totally on the same boat with Dr. Ola on this. If I had to prioritize what Lagos State can do, I'm not sure. Really, education would be my number one, to be honest. Software can be created anywhere, right? Silicon Valley is no longer the cluster of and it hasn't been for a very long time, right? I mentioned Eastern Europe. It's happening here in Africa, Cape Town, Kigali, many other places. And just to give a very concrete example, and I think this point was made earlier, we at Paystack, together with many other tech companies, Rise, PiggyVest, we piloted in 2019 a program with Lambda School, right? Where for 9 months, at no cost to the participants, right? They go through an intensive software development training program, and then they get placed, some of these companies, right? So if I had to look at the role of government, I think government has failed in education multiple times, right? And it's important for us to leapfrog and perhaps collaborate more with the private sector to drive that kind of vocational training program, right? I think you could say maybe there's exceptions and all that, but in today's world, like software can be sold to anyone, anywhere, and it can be created anywhere, right? So unlike Dr. Ola's point, we don't necessarily need to export our talents; they can be based pretty much here, right? So I think the more important point, I guess I would say, is how do you create a system here or a legal and regulatory framework that, one, can support business, and two, how do you build the right infrastructure for people to work here in Lagos, right? Something very basic like internet speed, right? And again, back again to a lot of these Eastern European countries, they have internet speeds that put the US to shame. So I think I'm not sure I would go for education as number one, but yes, if there is an initiative around education, I think it's more on collaborating and leveraging what the private sector and a lot of the tech companies are already doing, because we have to do it. We cannot afford to wait for government, right? So that's the only point, I guess, on that.
Thank you very much, Alice. So your point is that we should use education in a way that immediately advances what we are doing, working very closely with the various private sector companies. So thank you very much for that point. So because we have a very short time left, I would have loved to take that question, but if you can display it, I'll take it and see how we can resolve it. Also like to recognize Dr. Frederick Oladende, the Honorable Commissioner for Ministry of Transport. Dr. Frederick, thank you very much. Welcome, sir. Appreciate you being here. We'd like to also appreciate Mr. Okwe George, the Director General PPP Lagos. Mr. Okwe George is in the room. He just stepped out? Okay, please, appreciation to him for joining. And of course, we have our, we have Mr. Akeem, Honorable Commissioner, Minister of Science and Technology. Okay, all right. Good. Okay, so hello, Dr. Ola. You have a question from the audience on Zoom. And it says, interesting conversation earlier. How do you think the private healthcare providers like yours can make healthcare accessible for the masses that cannot afford or does not have access to quality healthcare in Nigeria? Dr. Ola, do you have a 30-second version of the answer to that question? Dr. Ola, they say you should not be flying all the doctors, so you need to send some of them to Abule Oja.
Hello, thank you for unmuting me. Sorry, we're not allowed to unmute ourselves, so I had to wait until I was unmuted. So how do you think private healthcare providers like yours can make healthcare accessible for the masses that cannot afford or do not have access to quality healthcare in Nigeria? You've just asked me my favorite question in the world, because that's exactly the problem that we're solving with the Flying Doctors Healthcare Investment Company. And that's why we're investing both in private-public partnerships and in the technology that enables those public-private partnerships to ensure that we can do just that, make healthcare affordable and accessible to people that can't necessarily afford it. So for the past 2 to 3 years, I've been investing exclusively in healthcare, and healthcare that uses technology to make healthcare more affordable. So right now we're invested in one of the largest chains of low-cost diagnostic centers, so about 50% cheaper than the usual retail price of blood tests and chest x-rays. They're called MDAS, and they're in underserved areas, so not necessarily in Lagos, and where they are serving Lagos, they're serving underserved areas in Lagos, to make sure that we can do things at lower prices. So I think the private sector's role is really to combine the infrastructure investments with the technology that enables those investments to bring down the cost of healthcare. And MDAS is a great example. But also there are issues around government financing in Africa, because we're a Pan-African company and we invest across Africa in healthcare. And I'm not sure if anybody has said this on this panel before, but Nigeria actually has one of the smallest tax intakes in the entire world compared to our GDP. So the government actually doesn't make very much money in Nigeria, and I think that people don't realize how little the government actually makes in money, makes in terms of revenue. To give you an example, Lagos State probably makes about $3 billion in tax, and we're 20 million in Lagos State. The New York budget was $100 billion, and they only have 9 million people. So to run a city of this size and this quantum with that tiny amount of money it's very, very difficult. And even in the city of New York, there's still homeless people, there's still people that can't access health, there's still people that can't access education, with over 10, 20, 30, 40 times what we earn here. So I think the role of the private sector, like I said, and the role of organizations like ours is to facilitate that by providing private sector capital, private sector efficiency, and private sector technology to really plug into large infrastructure projects and be able to deliver healthcare services to the masses at a much lower cost than you'll see in the Western world. Because even the NHS budget, for instance, is about $250 billion, and that's just the healthcare budget for 65 million people. The federal budget in Nigeria is about $1 billion. That's federal, not state. But still, you can see the difference, right? If Boris Johnson was to come to Nigeria now and give us a healthcare budget, it would run us on the federal level for 250 years. So I think, private sector capital expertise and efficiency is important for providing healthcare to the masses, and that's sort of what we do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ola. So I'm not going to be able to take any more questions, comments, or anything else. We have come to the end of the session. What I'm going to do is, analysts, thank you for those final words. Thank you, Dr. Ola, as well. Mr. Collins, if you have any final, please let us know. Mr. Joseph, final words. and then I'll take Mr. Tubosun last, and then I'll give the resolutions, and we're done.
Okay. Thank you very much, Salami. I think.
Thank you.
Thanks for a wonderful section. I think concluding the education was a priority one, most critical. I think every other subsequent discussions actually supports that. And you could see that the 4 policy trusts that I recommended, if you look at it, about 2 of them actually hinges around education. We talk about embedding digital technology, skill sets and education in our education curriculum. And the SA confirmed that they're looking at that. It's extremely important. You know, supporting the entrepreneurship, youth, and linking them to mentorship, again, is extremely critical. And I talked about the issue of tax incentives, waivers, and consistency of that. It's extremely important. It's an enabling environment you are creating for private sector to unleash their capacity and potentials. The only caution I would need to put is that as we do all this, we should look at internal consumption and look at internal need before we start thinking of exporting. It's a country that will have significant gap internally, and we need to fix that before we start feeding all the people.
Fantastic. Thanks. Special appreciation to Mr. Tokunbo Wahab, Special Advisor on Education. Mr. Tokunbo Wahab, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming. Mr. Tubosun.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists and everybody for contributing. Just to quickly respond to a question, you know, to build trust with the ecosystem, we need to have open and honest engagement points, right? And really to execute on what we need to do. So, and we've started that. So just to highlight a number of touch points, if people can go to lasric.lagosstate.gov.ng, that is our Science Research and Innovation Council. Watch out for call-outs and collaborative opportunities on there. For people that have innovative solutions around Lagos, it's ready for prime time. They can go on lagossolutionshub.com, you know, and really engage with public sector
apologies.
holders.
Is there anything like tech.lagos.gov.ng?
Tech.lagos.gov.
As a central point that contains all this information? That's something we should think about. So
the first one I mentioned, lasric.lagosstate.gov.ng, has a number of the research and innovation activities, such as the call-outs. So periodically we put out call-outs and certain activities there. So look out for that. And then for our data project that came out of AOT 1.0, you can go to eco360.ng. It's in beta right now. So that's our open data platform. And of course, I spoke about the Lagos Solutions Hub for any innovators that want to display their solutions for Lagos State that are prime time, that are ready. And we also have the other touch points across Lagos that a lot of us can. There is one more side that I'm trying to remember, but I guess I can put it on the platform and people can engage and discuss. So there are a lot of, oh yes, aotlagos.com for our evangelistic platform. So our tech summit every year, aotlagos.com, look out for that as well. So there are many touch points that people can really engage with the state.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So in closing, again, thank you everybody for being part of this session. It looks like we're oversubscribed. Thank you. The 5 final points. Number 1, education. Number 2, talent. So everything from software creation, like Alice said, you know. Number 3, policy, you know, tax, and so on and so forth. Number 4, evangelism. And I'd say, I mean, maybe we'll keep number 5 open, but those 4 things, and then things like, for example, the diplomatic mission, which is related to talent, the export of our people, the on-the-job learning, and then figuring out the various use case, which is not something we could do right here. Mr. Collins, I don't know if you're still on, but we're out of time, and those are 4 or 5 top things. I'm hoping that the organizers of the summit will take these key points, and hopefully next year, this is where this conversation will start, to say, what did we talk about, and what has the state done about it? I'm going to be holding Mr. Tubosun to his promise to give us a central contact point. One, I always love when it's one, and everybody else, everything else can distribute from there so that this conversation can continue on an ongoing basis. At this point, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending our session, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We all know challenges that have ravaged all over the world, and quite frankly, it's not just Nigeria, everywhere. Even the pandemic alone has been a testimony to the huge challenges that both governments and private sector face all over the world. And with those challenges come a sense of responsibility, and that responsibility clearly, if there's anything we've learned from the pandemic, is that it cannot be government alone. Private sector, all the different actors have to get involved. These huge challenges, of course, there's plenty to learn from successes in different parts of the world. And even with failures, there are things to be learned as well. So I'm very delighted today to have a panel here. Well, maybe not a panel, but a group of people who are sitting here today to discuss, the issues that have plagued our environment in the recent past. To kick off the conversation, I think it would be nice to talk about those who have had a lot of experiences in managing these sort of challenges and bouncing back. And Fred, I would just like to crave your indulgence and get you to start this conversation going and sharing some of the experiences that you have had and you have seen from being out there in New York City.
So the topic for today really is to look at the recent crisis and how Lagos can really learn from the New York. But I would like to approach the story of today the perspective of reinvention. New York about invention. We say the global capital of invention. And what does that mean? Throughout history, New York has successfully reinvented itself to major changes in the global economy. And the story of New York is essentially about reinvention. And I will cite about 4 or 5 examples there. In the Great Depression in the 1930s, the fiscal crisis of the 1970s, the 9/11 attack, the global financial crisis, and Superstorm Sandy, the city persevered and bounced back stronger. And the question is how? How? That is the New York City now. From its as New Amsterdam, demographic, political, social, and industrial shocks, that shaped its history. The city's status as a global leader in finance, innovation, and entrepreneurship has always enabled it to reinvent its industrial structure to build a more resilient economy. And permit me to speak a little bit about diversification here. Because at the end of the day, it really comes to being able to effectively tools and strategies, to diversify the economy. And a quick caveat is perhaps in order here. I've given talks a lot about diversification in Nigeria. So when I'm talking diversification in the Nigerian context, I try as much as possible to avoid using economic diversification because it is one of the most abused slangs in the Nigerian. But I'm happy we are talking in a regional context here. So in the aftermath of the global financial crisis of traditional industries in New York increased pressure. But as I said earlier, as a leader in innovation and entrepreneurship, the city was able to the fact that Wall Street remains a key driver of investment. We then leverage on that particular sector our economic growth, particularly in 4 boroughs outside of Manhattan. Before the crisis, growth was essentially concentrated in Manhattan. But in the post-recession period, the revitalization efforts of neighborhoods throughout the city, especially outside Manhattan, have contributed significantly to strong growth. And even as the city, became very resilient to the 2008 shock, its structure has evolved structurally over time and has been able to, recognize the benefits of the last decade. So while the recovery that we've witnessed since the 2008 crisis, have been very massive, I need to say that it has not been equitable. And that's part of the conversation today. You have economic growth, but it's not equitable because of the polarization in the labor market, meaning that folks at the top end of the income spectrum, continue to gain more compared to those at the bottom. What you then have is like a middle hollow type labor market, like a donut-shaped economy where high-income earners, are at the top of the distribution, while ordinary folks, at the lower end are struggling to make ends meet. And this is even complicated when you look at the structure of an urban center like New York, where affordability is a key issue. And then you talk about commute, So all of these nuances point to one thing, and that's the fact that there are so many lessons that Lagos, can learn from a super city, like New York. The economic development approach in New York is based on the fact that the city's economic strength comes from its diverse set of stakeholders, from domestic and international businesses, academic institutions, community-based organizations, private investors, and the public sector. These stakeholders essentially catalyze growth opportunities in existing and emerging industries in a bid to create good-paying jobs. And the city's strategy, again, is beyond traditional economic development initiatives. And let me explain that. So when you talk about traditional economic development, it's often about the growth of small businesses and legacy industries through, say, real estate development, tax incentives, or subsidies. But that's not what we do here. In New York, we are very focused on developing, attracting, and retaining talent. We recognize that human capital is the engine of growth in the knowledge-based economy that we are in. And as the main driver of our business location decisions. So what we have done here is to build a strategy around the city's competitive advantages. Many do not realize it, but New York is actually a coastal city. And from time to time, when I do analysis and policy initiatives, Lagos is always in mind. So here in New York, we have over 600 miles of densely populated coastline. And 4 out of our 5 boroughs are located on islands. So as the city becomes increasingly dense, more and more people are moving to the waterfront. So just like Lagos, our waterfront neighborhoods have traditionally been industrial with poor transportation access. So what did we do?